We are in a series called Culture Wars. Culture Wars. We're in part 4 of this series. Last week, we talked about alcohol. Should the Christian drink? Is it a sin for the Christian to drink? And we answered that question last week. And if you need the answer to that question, go back and listen to the recording on our website. Today, it's not as clear as to the question that we're going to answer. It's not as kind of black and white as it was last week, but one that I think is some valuable lessons that we can learn from this young man named Daniel and what he went through and engaged in his lifetime. If you have it, say, I got it. Okay, that's not enough. I'll wait till y'all get there. Daniel chapter 3. It's in the Old Testament for those who may be a little new to the Bible. That's okay. It's in the Old Testament. Probably about halfway through, you'll stumble into the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 3. If you don't have it by now, just turn your eyes to the screen and you can read with us. We're going to read, I think, through verse 18. So we got a lot to read. Let's read it together. We're reading from the New American Standard version of the Hebrew text, and here's what Daniel writes. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 60 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, then the herald loudly proclaimed, everybody say proclaimed, loudly proclaimed to you. Okay, say loudly proclaim. To you, the command is given, you can stop. O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music. Everybody say music. We're going to touch on music a little bit today. You are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Everybody say blazing fire. Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, everybody say music. All the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that the king had set up. Verse 8, for this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. Basically, they're telling on this group of people. They responded and they said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, that they are to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. That's what you said, O king. He said, but there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration. There are certain Jews in leadership that you put in leadership of the province of Babylon named Shadrach. Everybody say Shadrach. And Meshach and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, we just talked about that, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, I'm going to give you another opportunity to fall down and worship the image that I have created. But if you do not worship, you will be immediately cast into the midst of this furnace of blazing fire, and what God is there who can deliver you out of my hand? You see, he said, what God can really deliver you out of my hands if I throw you in that furnace? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve, he is able to deliver us. Everybody say able to deliver us. He is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But this is my favorite verse right here, verse 18. But what does he say? But even if he does not, even if God does not get us out of this furnace, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. You may be seated. I want to talk to us briefly this morning from this subject, stand your ground. Stand your ground. Everybody find a set of eyes and just look at them and tell them, stand your ground. Come on, everybody didn't do it. Do it. Everybody do it. Find somebody, find a set of eyes and point at them, look them in the eye and just tell them, stand your ground. Come on, find another set of eyes. Come on, tell them. We're going to say it until we get it. Stand your ground. Stand your ground. Stand your ground. Back in the day, there was a movie, probably in the early 80s, called Karate Kid. Anybody remember the Karate Kid? Okay, Karate Kid. The Karate Kid, if you don't know, let me give you just a very brief synopsis. In this movie, there was a man named Daniel LaRusso. Daniel LaRusso found himself living in a new city with going to a new school, having to make a new set of friends. But when he got to this new place that his mother had brought him to, he found out that there were some bullies in the neighborhood. Everybody say bullies. There were some bullies in the neighborhood who didn't like the way that Daniel moved around, didn't like the fact that he was going after the cute girl, in the school, the popular girl. They didn't like this, and so they decided that they were going to bully Daniel to the point where they would literally break him of his will, break him of his desire to want to be with this young lady, break him of his desire to not want to conform to what they said were the rules of the day. So I believe his name was Johnny. Is that his name? Johnny? Okay. So there was Daniel, the guy being bullied, and then there was Johnny, who was kind of the main bully. Daniel met this man named Mr. Miyagi. Anybody remember Mr. Miyagi? Mr. Miyagi was this older Asian man who was a good in karate. I believe that's why they called it the Karate Kid. And Mr. Miyagi taught Daniel how to karate fight. And eventually, when you get to the end of the movie, we find Daniel LaRusso, we find him standing his ground saying, look, if I'm going to ever get Johnny and the rest of his boys to stop bullying me and pushing me around, I have to take a stand. And at the end, Daniel takes a stand. He beats the bully, and ultimately he gets the girl. He rides off in the sunset, and he lives happily ever after, or at least until part 2 of Karate Kid. He lives happily until part 2 of Karate Kid. Everybody say, stand your ground. Daniel knew if he was going to get this bully off his back, at some point in time, he was going to have to stand his ground. There are laws in more than half of the states of the United States. There's a law that is called stand your ground. Essentially, what this law says is that if someone violates a standard or a boundary or something that you have set in place, hey, you cannot cross this line. If someone violates that, you have the right to take force to stand your ground. You can assault, you can defend yourself, you can assault them, you can do kind of whatever you want to do to stand your ground wherever you have drawn this particular line. Everybody say, stand your ground. Daniel in the text, Daniel and his boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are going to be bullied by this king Nebuchadnezzar, and they're being bullied to basically violate their religious beliefs. They're being asked to dilute their faith in God, and if they don't, they are threatened that they are going to die. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decide that they are going to stand their ground. They're not going to let their faith be diluted. If you ever had a diluted drink in the summertime, if you ever been to a family reunion and you get, and they don't chill the sodas before the family reunion, but they have a cooler full of ice, and you get a cup full of Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew or Coca-Cola, and what do? You go to the ice cooler and you scoop up a big cup of ice, and then you pour your beverage over the ice and you drink it, and it tastes so good. And then after a while, you'll set that beverage back down on the picnic table. And because it's hot outside, the ice is going to melt. And after you go and play volleyball with the family or participate in the tug of war or whatever festivity you guys are doing, when you come back to that drink, does that drink taste the same? It doesn't taste the same. Why? Because it's been diluted. The ice has melted and you can't even remember what you drank because the color has changed, the power and the potency has changed, and what you end up doing is just throwing it away because the drink has been diluted. There is nothing worse than a diluted drink on a hot day. There's nothing worse than a diluted faith, especially a diluted Christian faith, because it'll make this promise of life change. It'll make this promise of hope, but there'll be no power with the promise. It'll make promises that you can have change in your life currently and eternally, but a faithless, diluted Christianity will not have the follow-through to actually make it happen in people's lives. So Daniel, his friends, they say, look, we need to preserve the authenticity of our faith, the faith that we came with, and we are willing to stand out as a result. And my brothers and sisters at Shine today, if we are to have a powerful and authentic, non-diluted faith, one that can actually change the lives of torn down families and broken communities and aspects of our culture that hurt individuals, if we are going to see the gospel change those places, it's not going to happen by us fitting in more. It's going to happen by us being willing to stand our ground and to stand out. When we started this series, we started off with a definition of the culture or a definition of the world. If we can get the definition on the screen. When we say the world or we say the culture, what we're saying are we're talking about the attitudes, the aspirations, and the actions of society, which are primarily contrary to what the Word of God is saying. The attitudes, the aspirations, and the actions of the society that we live in, which are primarily contrary to the Word of God. That is what we mean when we say the world. That is what we mean when we say the culture. But we also talked about 4 different types of people that the average Christian kind of can find themselves or categorize themselves. These 4 categories are as follows. I'm gonna wait for it to come up. I think I made a slide for that. Did I make a slide? No slide for that. Okay, I'm just gonna tell you what they are. So the first group is the isolator. Everybody say isolator. This is the Christian that says, I don't want anything to do with the society. I'm going to isolate myself from the big bad world. I'm not going to shop at the grocery store. I'm not going to go to the schools. I'm going to do everything Christian. I'm going to buy my clothes from Christian clothes manufacturers. I'm going to buy my food from the Christian farmer. I'm going to get everything. I'm only going to do life with Christians. That's the isolator. That's not what Jesus did. Then we have the person who we call, what do I call that person? The drifter. This is the Christian that lives fairly unintentionally. And so as the world is throwing ideas and thoughts and ideologies and attitudes at them, because they're not living intentionally for Jesus, they just kind of drift. And so if the world says, we'll do this and this is okay, you just kind of drift with that. If the world says, okay, we don't want to do that anymore, that's not cool, let's do this, they just kind of drift, and that person just kind of drifts back and forth, not living with conviction, not ever swimming up against the stream of culture. That's not what Jesus did either. Then we have what I call the cultural chameleon. Everybody know what a chameleon is, right? A chameleon is an animal that changes colors depending on their environment. The cultural chameleon is a Christian who comes to church on Sunday, who has the biggest Kool-Aid smile in the whole room, the person that gives the best hugs, the person that appears to love Jesus on social media, but secretly they really love the world. They secretly more identify with the attitudes, the aspirations, and the actions of society than they really do the Word of God. Though they look like it on the outside, on the inside, they really identify more with the world than they do with the Word. That's not what Jesus did either. And then lastly, we have the transformer. This is what Jesus did. Jesus was a transformer of the culture. He was one who engaged in the culture. He was comfortable in the culture, but he was not transformed by the culture. He was a transformer of the culture. This is what we are striving to be. We're going to talk about those people a little bit in just a second. So let me give you a little bit of backdrop of how we get to the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, we find the nation, prior to the book of Daniel, we find the nation of Israel. Back in the book of Exodus, you'll remember that God got them out of slavery, out of oppression. They were being oppressed in the land of Egypt. They end up in the promised land. Everybody say promised land. Things didn't go according to plan in the promised land, not because God didn't hold up his end of the bargain, but they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. When God's patience ran out, they had to pay the consequences for their lack of obedience to what God told them to do. So God allowed their enemies, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, to come in and take them out of the promised land and take them away into captivity. Everybody say captivity. When they got to captivity, they were immediately shoved into a culture that was different than how they normally operated, and they served gods who were different than the gods that they served, and they really kind of completely disregarded the God that they had grown and known to love. And this is where we see Daniel is going to draw a line and say, look, this is where I am going to take a stand. The first place that Daniel takes a stand is at this place of defilement. If you go back to Daniel chapter 1, you'll notice some things about Daniel. This is a self-authored book, so Daniel is writing his own book kind of about himself, and here's what he wants you to know about he and his friends. He doesn't necessarily want you to know their business accomplishments. He doesn't highlight those things. He doesn't necessarily want you to know about their families. He doesn't highlight those things. He doesn't want you to know about their athletic feats, if they have any, because he doesn't highlight those things. But what Daniel wants you to know about he and his friends are that they refuse to defile themselves in this new culture that they find themselves thrust in. Daniel was a smart guy. Daniel was like a valedictorian type of guy. He was a guy who was at the top of his class. He was good looking. He was socially conscious. If you were a parent, this is the kind of guy that you would want your son hanging out with. He would be a positive influence. If you were a parent, Daniel would be the kind of young man that you would want to take your daughter to prom because he would have her back home at the time that you said she needs to be back home. Daniel was that kind of guy, but there was something in Daniel's life that commanded the spotlight more than his good looks and his good academics. The one thing that commanded the spotlight in his life was his zeal, his fire, his just on fireness, I would say, for God. He loved God like he loved nothing else. He was on fire for God. He was willing to stand his ground for God. He was, I guess in some respects, an extremist for God. Daniel finds himself in a place in Daniel chapter 1, kind of like an elite private school where he is exposed to the literature and the history and the culture of this new nation, Babylon, that he finds himself in. Now, while they're in Babylon, in Daniel chapter 1, they are offered the best food in the land. In this private school, they are offered all you can eat, all you can drink. And if you were a young man at that time, you're probably jumping right in and saying, man, I'm going to eat all I can eat. I'm going to drink all I can drink because it's free and I can do that. But Daniel says, no, I got to draw a line somewhere if I'm going to make sure that I'm not defiled. In verse 8 of chapter 1, Daniel, the Bible says, made up his mind. Another way to say that would be he set upon his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine. Now you have to understand that he is sitting at the king's table. They probably have the best food in the land. Imagine you were at the finest restaurant in Houston and they bring you the menu, and on the menu is filet mignon and lobster and the finest choice brisket and Japanese Kobe steak. And they have all these fine menu options. And instead, when we go to the restaurant, when I go to the restaurant, when I read what's on the menu, I first look at the price, and my price dictates what I eat. Is anybody else like that? Your price, your budget dictates what you want. You may have a taste for lobster, but if lobster's not in the budget, you get the catfish. Anybody? Okay, right. But this was not the case for Daniel and his friends, because when they looked at the menu and they glanced over to the price section, it just said free. Now imagine you're in that situation. What are you going to do? You're probably going to say, well, give me one of everything. I brought an appetite today. And this is what Daniel was offered, a young man who has a menu, the best food in all of the land, and all of it is free for him. And here's what Daniel did. Daniel sought permission from the commander of the officials, and he said, can I please not have to eat this food? Because if I eat this food, if I consume this, this might defile me. It went against the teachings of the dietary laws of his faith, and he knew once I start backpedaling away from my convictions, then at some point in time, anything goes. The Bible says that Daniel made up in his mind. If you ever been around somebody that has a made up mind, Yes, you've been around somebody that has a made up mind. They are determined that they are going to do what they are going to do. I remember back when I was in college, I had some friends that were determined to go to Freaknik. Now, if you don't know about Freaknik, Freaknik was this big party, like a kind of like a citywide picnic party that would happen in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, it would happen in Atlanta. Now, put on your geography goggles. If you're in Atlanta, you're in the southeast part of the country. Where we went to college was in the middle of Missouri. Okay, so you got to get from Missouri to Georgia to get to Freaknik. And these guys, they were determined. We are going to Freaknik. Now, I'm trying to discourage them from going to Freaknik, probably because I'm jealous because my parents were not going to let me go to nobody's Freaknik. So I'm like, look, y'all really don't need to go. One, you don't have a reliable car. What happens if you get to about Nashville and you break down? Look, we're not worried about that. We're going to Freaknik. Well, how? You don't have any money. You don't have a job. How are you going to pay for food when you get to Freaknik? Oh, don't worry about that. We'll handle that when we get there. You have no place to stay when you get to Atlanta. Don't worry. We are going to Freaknik. Guess what they did? They went to Freaknik. Guess who had a good time? They did. While I'm trying to discourage them, they said, look, Jaron, in other words, we have made up in our mind. Even if our car doesn't work, even if we don't have a place to stay, even if we don't have money, we are going to Atlanta. And this is the mindset that Daniel has. He says, though I may not be in the synagogue every Sunday, though I may not have the word at my grasp right away, there are some things I am determined to do. I am determined to stand my ground. I will not defile myself, even though the food looks good and it's culturally acceptable. He knows that if there are some things that if he consumes, it will spray paint graffiti all over the reputation of God and his personal relationship with God. Daniel understood something that we must grasp as Christians today, that if we are to stand boldly as influencers in our society, we must be willing to draw a line about what we consume. I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about the other things that we consume. Now, here's what the culture says. The culture says consume whatever you want, eat whatever you want, watch whatever you want. Entertain yourselves however you want to entertain yourselves. Consume as much junk, trash, filth, ratchet entertainment as you can stand. It's all good. It's okay. This is why back in the day, you didn't have cursing, you didn't have nudity, you didn't have sex all over the TV screens. Now, even on network TV, there's some stuff that you can't even let your kids watch because you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know they did this on ABC, NBC, and CBS because just 20 years ago, they didn't do this. Okay, y'all don't want to talk real. That's okay. That's okay. Look, watch this. Hollywood even draws lines about consumption. They have a rating system for movies. They say, look, we draw a line at what is G-rated. This is anybody can watch this. There's really nothing that's going to be offensive in a G-rated movie. They've drawn a line. Then they say, well, then there's PG movies, meaning there probably needs to be some parental guidance for children who are going to watch this kind of program because there's a little bit more content that is a little bit more mature and it might be offensive to a child. It might mess them up if they consume it. Then we have PG-13 and then we have R-rated movies. This is, if you're under 17, you must be accompanied by an adult because you're going to see some violence. You're probably going to see some nudity. You're going to see some stuff that people under 17 probably have no business seeing. And if Hollywood is drawing lines about consumption, how do you think the people of God should live? This is the way that ISIS, y'all know ISIS, this is how ISIS corrupts teens. What ISIS does when they're training people to ultimately behead people who don't believe what they believe in, what ISIS is doing is they're being meticulous about what they allow these people to consume. So they give them a steady diet of videos and teachings and entertainment that all leads them to hate certain types of people and eventually grow up to be able to kill those types of people. They don't do it. That's how they kind of brainwash them by monitoring what they feed them. Not the food they feed them, but all of the other stuff that they consume is very intentional because they're trying to brainwash them. If you find yourself today as a drifter, if you find yourself today as a cultural chameleon, you're probably not very considerate of what you consume. This is one of the tests to know if you fall in the drifter or cultural chameleon category, is that when you think of consumption, you have no conviction. When you think about what you allow to come into the eyes and ears of your life, you probably have no standards. It just means you're probably a drifter or a cultural chameleon. Over time, the constant exposure to filth will defile us. I had a cousin who died of lung cancer and never smoked a cigarette her entire life. She died of lung cancer from secondhand smoke because her husband was a chain smoker. Now, her husband would smoke back in the day, you just smoke in the house. So you just smoke in the house all day long. And after years of constant exposure to secondhand smoke, all of a sudden, she's the one that gets lung cancer and dies because she had been exposed to this filth for so long. The more we consume filth that goes, it teaches us in the opposite direction of what God is teaching us, the more we will dilute the very faith that we're supposed to be taking to people. Jesus says this when he's teaching his disciples, when he's going through boot camp with his disciples over 3 years, and he's trying to train them to change the world. Here's what he says in Mark chapter 8:15. He says, watch out. Everybody say, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Leaven is yeast, in other words. And what he's saying is, in Jewish culture, they would often talk about yeast as a way of talking about invisible influencers that are very invasive to our lives. So what he's saying is beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, meaning be careful of false religious teachings. Like today, be careful of the TV preachers that you watch. Because all of them are not talking, are not preaching and talking about the word of God. They're not preaching the gospel. Be careful about what you consume. He says also be careful about the irreligious stuff you expose yourself to. The stuff that you watch on TV, the stuff you entertain you with, watch. He says, watch, be careful of that yeast. Because if just a little bit of that stuff gets into your heart, you know how yeast works. If you want to make a loaf of bread, you don't need a lot of yeast. You don't. If you want to make some homemade rolls or biscuits, you don't need to go out and get a big thing of yeast. All you need is a little bit of yeast, and that little bit of yeast will infect the whole dough or all of the dough, and it'll rise up and make something. He says, if a little bit of yeast gets into your heart, it will begin to grow and overtake you, and pretty soon you won't have any standards when it comes to what you worship, who you worship, and the God that you're supposed to be serving. Here's Daniel understanding I can't eat off of everybody's plate. It wasn't a food thing, but he realized I can't eat off of everybody's plate. This is what I tell people sometimes. They'll say, hey, I listened to this great sermon. And I'll say, okay, well, send me the video. And then I'll come back to him and say, you can't eat off that plate. Now, I'm not saying you have to listen to me all the time, but let me give you some people that I know are really preaching the gospel that I believe that is really biblically sound, because you can't just eat off of everybody's plate. You can't always eat off of Shonda Rhimes' plate. Okay, do I need to get, okay. Shonda Rhimes, y'all know Shonda Rhimes. Shonda Rhimes wrote a whole bunch of shows, Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder. The reason, I was 5 seasons into Scandal before I shut it down, okay? And I love Scandal. I love Scandal. But I just had a problem over time. I just had a problem with the fact that they glorified this adulterous relationship. You got a woman, a single woman that everybody loves her. I mean, she's just doing her thing professionally. She's killing it. Her outfits were just dope. I mean, she is crushing it. Everybody knows Olivia Pope. Everybody knows her in culture. Olivia Pope. It's almost like she's a real person. Everybody is idolizing Olivia Pope, but Olivia is sleeping with the married man. And so what Shonda is kind of putting out there, and what we're idolizing and glorifying, and we can't wait to get home on Thursday night. You couldn't even get anybody to answer the phone on Thursday night when Scandal was out. No, I'm serious. Y'all remember when Scandal was out? You're like, don't call me. I'm not going to text you because Scandal is on. At some point. Anyway, all right, so you can't eat off Shonda's plate all the time. You can't eat off of everybody's plate all the time, because some of that stuff, like Jesus says, beware, because if that yeast gets in your heart, it will eventually overtake you. Lost my place. So Daniel understands this concept. And I'm sure some of his friends, as they're eating the best food in the land, are saying, Daniel, you're tripping, man. It don't take all that. You can still love God and still consume whatever you want. And Daniel says, no, I can't. No, we can't. I refuse to defile myself. And what does God do? You would think that the people who kind of fit in better would get promoted. But here's what the text said. In verse 19 of Daniel chapter 1, it says, the king talked with them. This is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so he was so impressed with them that he promoted them to enter into the king's personal service. So now they become, God promotes them because they were willing to stand up and stand out. They stood their ground and God promotes them. So they are now the personal attendants to the king. They went from the bottom. You talk about starting from the bottom and now you hear this is what happened to Daniel and his friends, not because they fit in so good, but because they were willing to stand up and stand out and to stand their ground. There's a principle at work here. There's a principle that if you are faithful with a little, God will put you over a ruler over much. There's a principle at play here. And they were faithful with a little conviction. And God says, look, I can trust you to be an influencer with more. I can trust you with more influence because I know that you'll draw a line where you need to draw a line. And so time passed. About 20 years had passed. These guys are in upper leadership in the kingdom of Babylon. They probably started off at about the age of 14 or 15, maybe a little bit younger in Daniel chapter 1. By the time we get to Daniel chapter 3, about 20 years have passed. So now these are young men in about their early to mid 30s, and they've been ruling and overseeing stuff in this foreign nation. They didn't recoil. They didn't fall back from the culture. They're still engaged in the culture. But as we know that they are willing to draw a line where is appropriate as it pertains to the culture. But here they are presented with another test, and they're about to draw a line at this place of diluting the faith. The first line that they drew was at defilement. We're not going to defile ourselves because that's going to impact our personal relationship with God. But then the second line that they're going to draw is at this place of diluting the faith, which has very public implications for their faith. The king has commanded in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar has demanded that people build him a golden image. It's 9 feet wide, probably from this speaker to this speaker, and is 90 feet tall. 90 feet tall. That's like, what, a 9-story building or something? I mean, it's huge. I mean, this thing is impressive, and it's probably overladen with gold, and he's got this huge statue that we learned in Daniel chapter 2 that is probably a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And in verse 2 of chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar sends the word out to all of the leadership in the nation, and he says, look, we're going to have a dedication ceremony for my statue, and I want y'all to come out here, and I want you guys to bow down when you hear the music, bow down and worship my image. Everybody say bow down. We're going to pull off on this exit ramp real quick and just take a peek at this topic of music. Notice the prominence of music in this chapter. Did y'all see what's going on in the text? He says, the moment that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music. He says, when you hear that, that's when you are to fall down. And you say, well, why did they just blow a horn? Why didn't they just sound a trumpet and then everybody just kind of do what they needed to do? Well, scholars believe that this Babylonian culture was a musically crazed culture. They were all about the music. They woke up in the morning with YouTube on, listening to music. They went to bed at night with earbuds in their ear, bobbing their head until they went to sleep. They're inundated with music. There's concerts constantly in Babylon. They are just inundated with music. They love me. They're music crazed, according to Psalm 137:3 and Isaiah 14:11. You can read them later on, but they are constantly into music in this particular culture. What the king does is he essentially puts together this large orchestra or a band, and he says, look, I want you guys to come out here, and I want you guys to play the best music that you possibly can. And so they're out here playing this beautiful, melodious music because what does the king know? The king knows that if I can get a good beat in their head, if I can feed them some good music, I can get them to do whatever I want them to do. Y'all missed that. If I can have the orchestra with all of these pieces, did y'all catch how many pieces are playing? Plus all other kinds of music. If I can put on a great concert and I can get them kind of, bobbing their head, man, there's some good acoustic guitar in there. Man, that's good. Man, they can sing. If I can kind of grease the message through music, I can get them to turn their back on what they believe. He's using music as a hook to reel them in because it sounds good and it's pleasing to the ears. This is why we play music in the lobby. When we play music in the lobby, it's so that when people come in, it kind of elicits a certain reaction, response. And we don't play hymns or slow music. We play upbeat music in the lobby. It's intentional. Why? Because we know that music, everybody knows, that music kind of elicits a certain type of emotion. That's why when you come into the sanctuary, if you're at church on time, you hear music playing. You hear music playing. Why? Because there's nothing that happens in the silence, but if we can play some stuff that is pleasing to you, it'll uplift you and help you get focused on God. God knows this, and King Nebuchadnezzar knows this as well. This is why God allowed David, the psalm writer, to set most of his scriptures to song. When you read the Psalms, you are reading songs just written out in the text. He's saying, look, people remember things better when we sing it. It captures people, their hearts, their minds, their affections. If we put those things to music, God knows this, but Nebuchadnezzar knows it too. If I can get them to listen to some good music, it'll be easier for me to get my message across. The bulk of the top songs out right now, what are they talking about? Are they bringing us closer to God? Are they helping us pull us away from God? Now back in the day, we thought Madonna was off the chain. Everybody remember Madonna? We thought Madonna was off the chain. I'm like, man, we can't believe that Madonna is dressing like that and talking about that. It was just like, wow, your parents may not even let you watch Madonna. You had to like sneak and watch Madonna. Now, OMG. Now, when you listen to Cardi B, who many females love and pay lots of money to see, Cardi B sold out at the rodeo like this. Because everybody wants to hear Cardi B. What is Cardi B talking about? No, she's not just talking about nothing. She's talking about a whole bunch of stuff that goes contrary to the word of God. But because her beats are sick, because her style is so like whatever, we like Bodak Yellow. Yeah. We like, man, you come around my way. Don't you? I mean, we just all up in it. But then when you stop, you know the words. I even know some of the words. When you stop and listen to the words, like, what are we teaching our young ladies about their bodies? Because she's being pretty graphic with her body parts, which is what first got my attention. Like, man, she talking about her body like that? And like, we glorify that. And what is that doing? That's okay, let me stop right there. There's other people, because there's not just Cardi B. There's Drake and Chris Brown. They got a song out, right? Drake and Chris Brown have a song out now? Y'all ain't gonna talk to me like y'all don't know. Look, y'all know it's number 7 on the Billboard Top 100. Number 7, Chris Brown and Drake. Now, I didn't even know they were working together. I don't know. I listened to the song, and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to listen to the messages, and there's nothing neutral or holy about it. Right, at least I don't remember. Now, maybe after church, if I miss something, I'll listen to it again, help me see it. But here's what we try to do. When we're a cultural chameleon and our hearts are really with the world, what we do is we try to find anybody that makes any reference to God, and then we say, well, see, they said this about God. See, when they went on the award show, they said, I want to give honor to God first. And we're like, see, they're a Christian. See, they put God in it, and then when you listen to their music, you're like, man, and God is nowhere near it. But because we like it and it's a catchy beat. Look, the enemy is allowing all of these messages to get in and to impact us. And no matter how much we try to say music doesn't impact our mood, we're lying. Because when you go to the club, you're not listening to Amazing Grace in the car. Nobody ever was fornicating off of I Am a Friend of God. Does not happen. It does not happen. But if you put a little Marvin Gaye on, you put a little bit of, some of Usher's songs on. You put a little bit, you put some Sam Cooke on for the seasoned saints. If you put a little Anita Baker on, and you let Anita start making some of those runs up and down the scale, you like, all of a sudden you're in the mood. When you're going out, you don't listen to that. You listen to, see, when I was a kid, there was an artist named DMX. Remember DMX, all right? And we used to say, and he has a song, y'all gonna make me lose my mind. And that's what you play when you go to the club, because it's gonna get you hype. And you're gonna go to the club and you're gonna be ready to go, right? They play, that was a club song. Lil Jon, they don't play Lil Jon, in a nice establishment. They play Lil Jon in the club because they know if I play Lil Jon, it's gonna elicit a certain emotion in you. Music impacts us so much. I had a coworker who said that. She said, Jaron, I stopped listening to certain music on my way to work because when I get to work, I'm mad at my coworkers. It just makes me angry. Because of what she's listened to and watched it, she said, I have replaced that stuff with now I listen to sermons on the way to work, and it changes the outlook of my whole day. I'm like, it works. It works with me too. When I'm watching too much ratchet TV, I know it because I start feeling distant from God. I feel like my prayers aren't really getting anywhere. I feel like my focus is off. It feels like I'm just kind of drifting in life. But then when I start listening to sermons and listening to the music that I really like, which is worship music, when I am consuming things that are healthy, it changes my focus. And that's what music will do. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. He's saying, look, if I play some good music, I can change their focus. They won't focus on what I'm really trying to get them to do. They'll just focus on the fact that there's a good beat in the background. And then they'll bow down. Philippians 4:8, Daniel says, look, we're not going to be fooled by the music, because here's what Philippians 4:8 says, which we should all commit to heart. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure. Everybody say pure. Whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report. Everybody say good report. If there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things, or let your mind linger on these things, not what Cardi B has to say. I believe God is looking for this church to not waste our lives being drifters and cultural chameleons who are reluctant to draw lines. But he's calling us, if we're going to influence the culture, we can't be so impressed by the culture. Does that make sense? I know y'all don't want to talk back to me. But when we find ourselves distant from God, not having any power, no conviction, not hearing well, no desire for him, no hunger for God, I want to encourage you to check what you're consuming. Check what you're listening to. What's on your playlist? You come into church not ready for praise and worship. What did you listen to on the way to church? When you leave church and you wonder why you forget the word or nothing sticks, what are you listening to when you leave church? What are you consuming Sunday afternoon and Sunday night? What are you consuming all week? All right, let me get out of that. Y'all real quiet now. All right, that's all right, that's okay. I'm gonna keep talking. So here's the text, what the text says. Now that we got off on that exit to see how music played a part in this worship, let's get back to the text. So here's this command. They told him, you guys need to bow down to the golden image. There's this great statue. There's this huge symphony. But at the same time, what we might have missed is that this command is a slap in the face to religion. Here's what Nebuchadnezzar does. He is trying to dilute the faith and make one unified religion. Making one unified religion. And here's what he says in verse 7. At the time he says, when all the peoples hear the horn in this orchestra, he says, all the peoples, nations, and the men of every language fell down and worship. Now, what does it say? There are people from all over the region that are now under Babylonian control. And no matter what religion they had, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, look, I don't want you to have your own religion that you came from your own place. I want you all to fall up under this one unified religion. He's trying to get everybody to think and believe the same way. And here's what the culture says about religion. Here's how the culture tries to dilute all religions, but in particular Christianity. All roads lead to God. Anybody ever heard that? Or said it? All roads lead to God. That's what the culture says. All religions basically teach and believe the same things, which is for you to be a good person, so just pick one. Now, no major religion, nobody that practices Judaism, Islam, or Christianity for real would agree with that. No person serious about Islam says Islam is the same as Christianity and Judaism, just pick one. No person who is a devout Jew says, or a Jewish person does not say, well, Judaism is the same as Christianity and Islam, just pick one. They're saying, no, I believe what I believe. These people believe what they believe, and I believe, I'm convicted by what I believe. They're convicted by what they believe, and they don't feel the pressure. I don't feel the pressure for making one unified religion. Just pick one. You do you and I'll do me. It's all good. That's what the culture says. If you do you, you believe what you believe, I'll believe what I believe, and you don't ask me about it. Don't talk about politics and religion at work. Y'all have heard that. Don't talk about politics and religion. Jesus doesn't teach that. That's what the culture says. Why do you care about what I believe anyway? That's what the culture says. Why do you care about what I believe in and who I serve? Or they may even say this, culture may even say this, you are an extremist. What makes you think that you're right and somebody else is wrong? You are an extremist. But here's the reality. If you're a Jesus follower, you are following one of the most extreme people in all of the history of mankind. Jesus was an unapologetic extremist. If you're walking with us on Tuesday night through the book of John, last time we had Bible study, you remember that Jesus, they called Jesus a liar. They called him a lunatic. They said, this man has lost his mind, and Jesus didn't care. He kept preaching the way he was preaching. He kept being controversial because he did not care. Jesus was an extremist. This is the truth, and you will know the truth, and this truth is the only truth that will be able to set you free. If we are going to prevent the culture from diluting our faith, we must take a stand. Alexander Hamilton from the play Hamilton, he said, if you stand for nothing, you will fall for anything. And then we'll be left with a diluted faith that is no good for anybody. It's healthy to have high standards. It's okay to have high standards. We all have high standards. Look, if you're single, or everybody was single at one point, you don't just let anybody into your life. You don't just get into a relationship with anybody. You have standards. I want this person, I want to make sure that they have a job. I hope. That's like minimum. I want to make sure this person has if they're of working age, they have a job, they're not abusive, they treat their parents with respect. They have some goals, ambitions, and you would call somebody crazy if they didn't have standards. In fact, we said to our friends, you just gonna let this person come in and out of your life like that? Girl, you don't have any standards? Bruh, you don't have any standards in your life? Right, we praise healthy standards except when it comes to religion. Except when it comes to Jesus, then we want to start lowering the standards. Well, we'll just let anything go. Peter and John were told in the book of Acts, they were told to stop preaching Jesus in the temple. But they drew a line right there and said, nope, you're not going to dilute the faith. Jesus has set a high standard, and even if you beat us and throw us in jail repeatedly, we are going to do what Jesus told us to do. We are going to stand our ground. So he's trying to dilute everyone's faith by promoting a unified religion. The second thing he's trying to do is he's trying to make religion just a largely symbolic gesture. He's just trying to make it a symbolic gesture. Now, look, Nebuchadnezzar is not really trying to start a religion. He's just trying to he's really using religion as a political tool to get everybody on the same page. He's just using religion as a means to an end. It's a tool. It's symbolic. And here's how the culture tries to do the same thing. They say religion is just a tool that helps you feel better about yourself. Religion, you just fit religion around your schedule. It's not the primary thing that you base your life around. It's just something that you fit in your schedule as you can. It's okay, the culture says, to compromise your faith if it's going to make it easier for you to fit in with people. The culture says, this is an aspect of your life, but that's it. It's not the defining issue of your life. The culture basically says, take a very casual approach to religion because it doesn't take all that. It doesn't take all that. It doesn't take going to church on Sunday. If you go to church on Sunday, you've done good. If you open your Bible at all in this year, if you put something on social media that remotely sounds Christian this year, you're okay. It doesn't take all that, like Bible study and prayer and fasting and really seeking the Lord and trying to transform people's lives. It doesn't take all that. Religion it's just a tool. It's just a means to get what you want. And the culture is absolutely right if you just want to play Christianity. If you just want to play church a little bit, then the culture is absolutely right. It does not take all that. But don't be surprised if 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5 is true in our day, that we will have a form of godliness, but no power. We'll have we'll have all the trappings of God, but there will be no real life change, no real deliverance. Nothing will happen, but we'll look good on Sunday morning. The culture's right. But the culture is absolutely wrong if we are a people who are striving for perfection. Not that we're perfect, but the New Testament, Paul talks a lot about striving for perfection. And we say, it don't take all that. But the only time we say it don't take all that is when it comes to Jesus. Now look, when a basketball player says, look, I'm going to stay after practice and shoot 300 free throws and an extra 100 three-pointers, we don't think that's extreme at all. We just say they want to be great. They want to be great. And they will still, even if they're great, they will still miss half of their shots. But we don't sneer at the fact that they're striving for perfection. But when it comes to Jesus, we sneer when people strive for perfection. It don't take all that. It don't take all that. If we are going to be culture changers who strive for perfection, it does take all that. It does take us being intentional to draw lines and say, I am going to take a stand right here. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all of them, if they were here today, they would say, amen, pastor, because they realize, they say, it does take all that. And so now you're saying, we're not even dealing with the fiery furnace. We're just dealing with all of the lead up. Verse 8, and I'm done. It says, for this time, let's see what happens to these boys. They come forward they bring these, so it says, okay, let me back it up. So these people, there's some people who are jealous that these Jewish boys have made it to the top of the administration. They got good jobs, good benefits, good pay. I mean, they have all this influence. All these people working for, they are doing well. So these other people, they get jealous and they say, man, we're trying to set these guys up. And they see an opportunity where they won't bow down. They say, look, these guys that you put in office, they won't bow down to you. And so the king calls them in and says, guys, look, I'm gonna give you one more chance. I'm gonna give you one more chance to bow down. And if not, I'm gonna throw you into the furnace. See, God trusted them enough to make them cultural leaders because he knew that they're gonna draw some lines. And if he gives them influence, that they're gonna steward that influence well. The word gets back to the king that they won't bow, and now they have a choice to make. So what do? They say in verse 18, God, even King, if God does not deliver us from this situation, we will not bow. We will not allow you to dilute our faith. Here's what they teach us about standing our ground. 3 things. I got to go really quick. 3 things. 1, if we want to be culture changers, cultural influencers, we must reduce hypocrisy. That's first thing. We must reduce, everybody say reduce hypocrisy. We have to be people who practice what we preach. One of the biggest complaints about Christians today is what? Christians are what? They're hypocrites. They say one thing, but then they do another, right? And so a lot of people are turned off by the church because they say Christians are hypocrites. But here's what Paul says in Titus chapter 1. He's talking about false teachers. He said they profess to know God. They say it. They have it on their cubicle in their office that, Jesus is the center of my joy. Put God first. They're always saying all these religious sounding things. He says, but by their deeds, they deny him. So as soon as they leave work, or even while they're at work, they cussing folks out, passing inappropriate stuff across social media. If you're in high school or in that kind of, even grown folks, you're sliding nude pictures in direct messages. Or you get you're sending it to your friends like, man, look at this. And so he's saying, you say one thing, but you deny it by the way that you act. This is what the word says. He says, and being detestable and disobedient and worthless for any good deed. That's what happens to a person who's a hypocrite. So if we're gonna be cultural influencers, we need to do what we say we're about. If we say we are a part of Shine, that means something. If we say that we are part of the body of Christ, that means something. That means that we have certain standards in how we walk out what God has told us to do. Does that make sense? Second thing we need to do, reduce hypocrisy. Second thing we need to do is we need to raise the standard. So for Daniel, you'll see how the standard was raised. At first, the first thing they had to do was not defile themselves. 20 years later, the next test came, and it was about diluting the faith. And so they progressed in the ways that the standard was raised for them. Now, look, you guys have been in leadership this whole time. Everybody knows who you are about, who you serve, who you worship. Everybody knows this. Now, everybody's watching you to see how you live that out. And Daniel and his friends say, look, we're going to continue to raise the bar, even if it's going to cost us our lives. See, in Daniel chapter 1, them not eating the king's food, that was going to defile them, but they probably wouldn't have died, perhaps, if they ate it. But now if they stand their ground in Daniel chapter 3, it may cost them their lives. They've just raised the standards. My brothers and sisters, we can't let our coworkers, our friends, and our family bully us into backing down our standards, engaging us into gossip. We got to take a stand. Trying to pollute our spirits with all kind of trash and filth. We've got to take a stand. We have to draw a line. We have to take a stand. Winston Churchill once said, if you have enemies, it simply means that you have taken a stand for something at some point in your life. If everybody loves you all the time, then you're probably a chameleon. One way here, switch it up another way here, switch it up another way here. And Daniel will tell you, it's not about how much you can fit in all the time. Sometimes it's how much can you stand out that God rewards. Lastly, we need to rally around one another. We need to reduce hypocrisy. We need to raise the standard. And lastly, we need to rally around one another. When we look at movements like the civil rights movements, now Martin Luther King Jr. is kind of the face of the civil rights movement, but he was not alone. He was not alone. He had a whole coalition of people that were with him, no doubt behind the scenes, kind of encouraging him to do what he knew that they were all supposed to do. So when Martin Luther King, I imagine there were days where he wanted to give up. There were days where he wanted to quit. But he had people rallying around him saying, look, we're not going to quit. Here's what I imagine happened on that plane in Dura. They're standing in front of that image, and there's Shadrach, there's Meshach, and Abednego. Everybody else is listening to the music. Everybody else is bowing down. And they just kind of standing there like, man, you better not bow down. But man, Shadrach's thinking, man, I got a good job. I got good benefits. It's good for my family. Man, let me just go and take that knee. And Meshach, man, you better not bow down. And Meshach's thinking, man, I got a family I got to take care of. I'm up for a promotion next year. Man, I'm just going to go and take this knee, and I'll just ask God to forgive me later. You better not bow. Abednego saying, you know what, man, it really doesn't take all that. We know we love God. We don't need to really show it publicly. Man, let me just go and take this knee. Man, you better not bow. And because they had each other to encourage one another, they were able to boldly tell the king, look, even if you have to kill me, I will not dilute my faith. I will not turn my back on my God, even though I have so much to lose. I believe they could do that because they had community. They were doing life with other people that were similarly courageous enough to draw a line and to take a stand. The question is, who in your circle is going to stand with you? When it's time to draw some lines, are there people in your circle that are going to stand? Girl, you better not bow. You thinking about marrying him, you better not bow. He don't love Jesus. You're thinking about taking that job? Well, that job's gonna pull you away from all of your commitments to God. You better not bow, even though it pays you $20,000 more a year. You better not bow. Do you have people in your circle who are gonna help you stand when you need to stand your ground? The culture not only tries to dilute our faith, but the culture also tries to dilute the reality of sin. The culture tries to reduce the reality of sin. Say, sin's not a big deal. You're just young and you're just exploring life. You're just weak in this area, but you're a good person. Culture tries to dilute the reality of sin. And if we're not careful and if we believe that, we've just diluted the significance of the cross. When we dilute the reality of sin, we dilute the significance of the sacrifice of Jesus. Because Jesus died for the full reality of our sin. While we were yet sinners, while we were acting a whole fool in all of our mess, in our junk, in our filth, which was really bad, Jesus says, I'm gonna die for you. And this same Jesus that died some 2,000 years ago is available today. If you want Jesus, he comes 100% pure, potent, concentrated, no dilution. And if you want to have Jesus, that's what you're signing up for. I'm not signing up for a diluted faith, a diluted experience with God. I'm signing up for the whole of the real thing. And if you're here today with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you're here today, and maybe you've been just kind of around church or playing church, and you've allowed all of the stuff that you consume to convince you that it doesn't really take a relationship with Jesus, a commitment to Jesus, to really live this life that we've been called to. Perhaps you're here and you've never made a decision to follow Jesus. And if that's you today, Jesus died for your sins.